Hi, I'm Esty with Orlando Live here at the Florida Film Festival 2013. And you know the Enzion is all about film, food, and friends. And some of our very own chefs, they've been nominated for the James Beard Award. So we're gonna go check them out. They're presenting the food panel.
What we're going to do, the folks here today, I mean, it's a fairly large panel. They've all got great stories to tell, great accomplishments, a lot to talk about. We could go on for days just with any single one of them. But I think I'm going to have kind of, what I'm going to do, because they have such varied backgrounds, there's not like kind of one unifying question I can ask everybody. So I'm going to do kind of a lightning round of questions for them to give me some short answers. And then I'll get into formally introducing each one of them and ask them a question or two. And then there'll be plenty of time for y'all to ask any questions that you might like. So just starting at this end and working on down, I'm going to ask you to make some hard choices here. You can start off, James. Fried okra or boiled peanuts?
Boiled peanuts, for sure.
Okra. I'm coming down on the side of okra.
These are hard choices.
Boiled peanuts, please.
Fried okra, no doubt.
I have often hoped, and I've spoken about this in public before, that at movie theaters you could get fried okra instead of popcorn. So I'm going with boiled peanuts.
Cajun spice boiled peanuts.
Oh, all right. Good. Okay. Tougher. Pulled pork or fried chicken? Ooh.
I'm going to go fried chicken with that one.
Skillet fried or deep fried?
It's your choice, Martha.
Skillet fried. Cornbread. I mean, chicken.
Probably fried pork sandwich there.
There you go.
A fried chicken.
I'm going with the pork for sure.
I can't be asked to choose between God and country.
Okay, well, maybe Troy, that's good. Maybe Troy might be disqualified from answering this question, but I'll ask it anyway. What's in your hip flask? James, start them off.
All right. You know, it kind of depends on where we're at, but, you know, bourbon's always the choice.
Brown liquor.
Brown liquor.
Yep, my wife's Pappy Van Winkle. Brown liquor.
Troy, go ahead.
I have two flasks. I actually, make whiskey, as you know. I make Troy and Sons and blonde whiskey, and I've kind of, what I've learned from whiskey making has really ruined me, so I don't drink anyone else's spirits.
Ooh.
And I can explain that at length later. So I would have one with my white spirit for cocktails and one with blonde whiskey.
So you got two flasks?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I wish I had your flask, but we just had a 3-month-old, so more than likely it's breast milk or formula for me these days. But
I'm going to be passing on that one.
Always been Pappy, but I'm taking up this blonde whiskey thing.
If you were going to be stuck on a desert island for the rest of your life and could eat only one thing forever and ever, what's it going to be? We'll start down at your end so James doesn't have to kick this one off.
Beef.
Beef.
for me, it would be my grandmother's cornbread.
I think homegrown tomatoes.
Ooh, okay.
Maybe some sourdough.
Ooh.
Banana pudding.
Banana pudding.
You know what? I'm going to go real simple and maybe just a nice cheeseburger.
Whoa. Okay. Good answers all. What we're going to do now is kind of get speak to each one of our panelists a little bit more in depth here. Who are we going to start off with? Let's see here. Who am I going to start? Okay. She moved to North Carolina from Texas. She went to Vanderbilt University, and I think her product has only been out now for, what, 3 years? Yeah, 2 years. She is proud to be one of the very few, if not only, female distillers in the United States with her Troy and Sons. She has 3 sons, Marshall, Colton, and is it Luke? Her husband, Charlie, is an engineer, and he claims to have the nose for their product while she has the taste. Had a wonderful cocktail at Cask and Larder last night that Larry made with cherry hearing and Campari and your brown product, which was awesome. So Troy Ball of Troy and Sons. Troy, I'd like for you to talk to us a little bit about, we can talk to us about whatever you want, but tell us about Crooked Creek corn and how you came to find it and why you use it.
I absolutely will. When I learned about the keeper kind of whiskey, the whiskey that was made in the mountains that never left the home place, I was pretty intrigued. I had been given a lot of moonshine whiskey that was left, a lot to be desired. And the old guys kept telling me that the best whiskey was kept at home. And in 2008, I had an 80-year-old man bring me a jar of really great white whiskey, and it was smooth and beautiful, and I could not believe it. And he says, that's the good stuff. That's the keeper kind. And so from that moment on, I realized that I wanted to figure out if I could make that, because if I could, I knew that product was not well represented in the marketplace. And I thought, this is America's original spirit, white whiskeys. George Washington made white whiskey, right? And I said, why aren't we making American-based cocktails instead of vodkas or tequilas or rums? All lovely products, but what about American white products? So that's how I went down this road. Well, it turns out the old men, when they made really well-made whiskey, they made it with white corn. White corn was commonly grown in the mountains because it was the favored bread corn, cornbread corn. And so they would have been using the white corn to make their whiskeys. So I met these 2 women who owned a restaurant in Asheville, and I asked them if they knew any place I could get some good quality white corn, and they said, oh, you need to meet John McIntyre. And I called him and I said, I'd like to buy some white corn from you, because at this point I've already built a little 5-gallon still, and I'm going to do a test distillation in my basement, right? And he says, how much do you need? I said 100 pounds would be good. He goes, what in the world are you going to do with 100 pounds of corn? And I said, well, I've just got some recipes I'm checking out. And he goes, okay, well, how would you like it milled? And I said, well, I knew I wanted whole corn, because some of the old guys I had learned from, they were using whole corn in their recipes. And I said, well, what are my choices? He says, well, I have a stone mill, and so we can do fine grits, coarse grits, and I have a hammer mill. And I thought, oh, God, okay, I need 300 pounds of corn. And he's like, what? He's selling grits in 2-pound bags, right? And he says, are you that lady that wants to make whiskey? I said, yeah. And he goes, I tell you what, I'll trade you some corn for some whiskey. And so that's how I found Crooked Creek corn. Well, Crooked Creek corn, when I went out to pick up this 300 pounds of corn, turns out they had this old grain of corn that had survived on their family farm since the 1800s. It was very typical that corns would be passed around in a community. One family would keep the seed corn. And in this case, the McIntyres ended up with it and no one else was growing it. So I took it to the University of Tennessee and had it analyzed, and the researcher's eyes just popped out of his head. He said, I've never seen a corn that analyzes like this. And so that's how it ended up with Crooked Creek corn. And John McIntyre is a partner today with us in the distillery.
Well, it works.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we'll jump around totally here on our panel. Will Harris III. He's, you might have seen some of Joe York's work on Will, his films. He is, well, White Oak Pastures is now in its 5th generation of Harris's, I believe. One of your daughters has come on. They're located in Bluffton, Georgia. The farm has been there since 1866, and it is. And I'll let Will talk about this really, because I think about 20 years ago, you made a decision to kind of stop the centralized production of cattle that was so familiar in America, and kind of revert to the old ways and move White Oak Pastures to a more artisanal kind of production there. Talk a little bit about, what was your epiphany? What made you want to do that, and did people think you were nuts?
I'd like to tell you there was a burning bush, but there wasn't. There was, I went to the University of Georgia, majored in animal science, and came home and really further industrialized the farm that my father had previously industrialized. And really enjoyed it, really, we're very linear, Western, alpha male, more is better. And that's what that whole farming game plan is about. But what was a lot of fun when I was in the 20s, when I got in my 40s, was not. And we went back to the excesses of it had become problematic for me. So we started taking the farm back. When my great-grandfather came there in 1866, all he had was his livestock and the farm and land. So high animal welfare and high environmental sustainability would have been what it was all about. And my father's generation, his watch began after World War II, and that's when we started the process of commoditizing, industrializing, centralizing the production. And I've been blessed that on my watch, we're taking it back the other way. And that's a lot of fun.
And I understand y'all recently opened a restaurant, or fairly recent, Pasture to Table, is that what it's called?
We did.
Tell us about that.
When I first started to deindustrialize, we were a monoculture of only cattle. And I gave up some of the tools, hormone implants and subtherapeutic antibiotics, and then later we gave up pesticides and chemical fertilizer, and later we added other species, and later we built the processing plants, and last June we built the restaurant. So it's, again, not to beleague it, but deindustrializing, decommoditizing, and decentralizing is what we're about. High animal welfare, higher environmental sustainability, and it's about the program. We got 85 employees that are like family.
Well, we kind of mostly want to hear what you serve to eat. I think Pasture to Table is set up to serve employees, but then the public can come there and eat. It's yeah.
It is. It's a restaurant in that we have a license from the health department. What we don't have is a menu or walls or servers. We've got 2 great ladies that can put 100 plates out that little window in 30 minutes. And you don't choose beef or pork, it's yes or no. And we also have a 5-acre certified organic vegetable farm, and we raise eggs. So every, I think they do it on Friday, our people come together and say, I'm really long on chicken legs. Well, chicken legs damn sure going to be cooked one day next week. And whatever we're long on or whatever's being harvested in the garden is what we serve. And we're not there yet, but I'd like to get to where I can put up a sign and say everything came from here except the salt and pepper.
How much does lunch cost?
Employees eat for $1 and everybody else eats for $5. Our controller tells me our cost per plate's $7 and something, so we're not doing real well. She said I was fiscally irresponsible. I thought she said physically irresponsible.
That too, huh? Well, we'll move down here to the man who has been called the Fellini of Southern food. Actually, I think he's been called the Ken Burns of Southern food, but Fellini just sounds a lot more alliterative there. So Joe York has dazzled us all over the. How many films have you made now? 40-something is what?
It's in the 30s somewhere. I'm not exactly sure how many there are.
Closing in on 40 about all manner of topics of life throughout the South, and including Pride and Joy, which showed here yesterday. Was it yesterday, I believe?
Yeah,
Yay.
yesterday. It's very cool. Thank you.
I mean, Joe's done films about everything from squirrel hunters and barbecue to oystermen and African-American tamale makers and everything like that. Joe, whenever we see one of your films, we think, where did he find this? Where did he get this story? What you working on? What are we going to see next?
Well, what are you going to see next? That's a really, probably a film about Troy. We were just talking about that earlier. What a great story she has. What you're going to see from us, I'm very, very lucky in the world of filmmakers in that I have a 9-to-5 job. I'm on salary with the University of Mississippi. I work with media and documentary projects at the university, and we work then with the Southern Foodways Alliance, which is who I partner with to make all of these films. And so that's my job. I mean, if I'm not making films, they're going to fire my ass. So I need to be constantly making films, just like you guys at your jobs. If I walk in and they see me playing solitaire and not making a film, they're going to get on me. So that's really good. It's good to A, have that stability, but B, that that constant kind of push to keep making. And that's why we've made so many. And also they're short. You can make a lot more when they're short. But the Southern Foodways Alliance is all about documenting, studying, and celebrating the diverse food culture of the American South. So what you're going to see from us is what you've always seen from us, is finding interesting people like Troy, like Will, like Martha, like Donald, these guys that are doing incredible Southern dishes. Mostly we focus in the Deep South. We have not done as much in this area of Florida. We've been up on the Panhandle a good bit. But what you're going to see is us looking at food as a lens through which to see the culture. So we're going to make films about oysters. We're going to make films about barbecue. We're going to make films about boiled peanuts. We're going to do all that stuff. But what we're really trying to do is paint a picture of the region as that is accurately portrays how diverse it is, how many wonderful foodstuffs are still coming out of the region. The idea that I think I spoke about yesterday after the film, that the South is not just one big interstate exit with a Cracker Barrel, an Exxon, and a Burger King. This is, we still have all this wonderful food everywhere. Like we had, last night at Cask and Larder, what a great example of just the wonderful diversity that comes out of here and comes out of the South. All those tastes together really is what we're trying to get at with the film. So while I can't tell you exactly what the next film is going to be, because we just finished Pride and Joy, and I'm really enjoying hanging out with my baby and not worrying about that too much right now, I'll tell you that it'll be about passionate people doing great Southern food and using those people as a way to understand what the culture is, what the history is, and hopefully make people really, really hungry. That's our hope. So.
You've succeeded. We're hungry. Jumping down to this end of the table, James Petrakis, who with his wife Julie started the Ravenous Pig restaurant 5.5 years ago. And then, let me see, about this, last October, they had a real harmonic convergence in that they had a second child. They published a wonderful cookbook called The Ravenous Pig, Seasons of Florida, and they launched another restaurant all within just a few weeks' time. And he's still standing right here, or at least sitting on this panel. But James has dazzled all of us here through Central Florida and elsewhere with the wonderful cooking they do at Ravenous Pig. Last night, for those of y'all who weren't there, he brought out a grouper. How much did that grouper weigh?
32 pounds.
A 32-pound grouper. And he cooked it in a way that he had never cooked it before, which was a real leap of faith, I thought, And so maybe talk a little bit about, how Southern food influences, what you do at your restaurants, but talk about that grouper last night, because that was awesome.
All right, we'll talk a little bit about the grouper and then a little bit about the restaurants and just about Central Florida and Florida in general. So what we did is everyone was, the kitchen staff said, hey, let's just roast this grouper. I said, no, you know what? I want to crust it in salt. Let's smoke it all day. I really think this is going to work out. It's going to keep everything in. They said, well, it's on you. I said, fine, I'll take it. So we put it in at about 11, crusted the whole thing in salt. It was 32-pound grouper. Put it on, we have a smoker built into the back of the restaurant, basically. And put it on the rack, smoked it at 200 for about 7 hours, finagled it onto a board, and they said, well, what are you going to do with it now?
Wait, let me stop you right here. What did your wife say when you told her you were going to do that?
So yeah, I ran home in the middle of the day. We were putting the boys down for a nap. I told her what I was doing. She said, you're going to ruin that fish. Everyone's going to laugh at you. I said, well, that's the way it goes. And I said, that's the way it's going to be then. And so we put it out. I didn't know what was going to go on. And got it on the board. We brought it out for the shrimp boil. We just peeled the skin back. I said, hey, this is going to work here. Flaked a piece off, gave it to Bob. He said, yeah, this is pretty good. I said, all right, let's go with it then. So that's kind of the story of the grouper. And now we're gonna start doing that in our brewery room. But you know, my wife and I started Ravenous Pig and Cask and Larder, and I hear everyone on this panel talking about, you know, traditions in the South, and that's one of the reasons why we opened restaurants here in Central Florida, is to kind of start traditions here. And I think that's what Florida has kind of been missing, is it's been such a transient state that we don't have the generations and the traditions and all that. So we were proud to kind of call this our home and say, hey, we're going to do something that we believe in here for, you know, the people we grew up with and our neighbors, and start, you know, a tradition like Georgia and Tennessee and everybody has, and kind of build that wealth of tradition and just good food. So that's kind of why we did the restaurant. So.
Okay, she's the author of 2 wonderful books, who could probably just sit up here and regale us with stories for the rest of the afternoon. Screen Doors and Sweet Tea, and A Southerly Course. She was born in the Mississippi Delta, has traveled widely and wildly probably. Went to cooking school in France. Has worked with a number of esteemed restaurants, like with Nancy Silverton at La Brea Bakery. She cooked for Denzel Washington. Is that part of the deal too? Yeah. Anyway, I just told Martha she could talk about anything she wanted to, but I'm going to start off by asking her, I saw a recipe that you made for a mint julep that used cantaloupe. And I thought, that is sacrilege. But well, go ahead and explain yourself on that one.
Actually, it is a cantaloupe daiquiri as opposed to a julep. But I love the movie Suddenly Last Summer. And in that, Mrs. Venerable has her trusty secretary deliver her a daiquiri every day at 5 o'clock. And I thought that would just be such a wonderful way to live. Like every day, straight up at 5, a daiquiri would appear. And so there's a recipe for that. I think that's in the first book, in Screen Doors and Sweet Tea. Mostly how my books thus far have gone, I'll really either start with an ingredient or a person or a place, and then develop the recipe to go with it. Because, you know, in this day and age, if you want a blueberry cobbler recipe, you can have, you know, 5 million recipes on your phone while you're standing in the grocery store. And so I think giving the food a context around it really improves the flavor, and also it gives you something to talk about when you're serving it to your guests. And in last night we had a blueberry cobbler, and that recipe was a tribute to an old bridge that has been taken out of commission. And instead of being a drawbridge, it was one of those bridges that turned. When I was a kid, it was so weird. You'd get to the end of the road, and the bridge was running up and down the length of the river as opposed to across the river. And I was always really fascinated, and now it's not there anymore. And so that recipe was a tribute to a place that doesn't really exist anymore, but it was a story that I wanted to make sure that it even existed was captured somewhere. So a lot of my work is tributes to places and people. And
what you got coming up next?
Currently, I'm working on a really crazy project. I'm ghostwriting for a country music starlet which ghostwriting is really fun because then you get to tell somebody else's story but pretend like you're them while you're telling it. It's kind of like being a ventriloquist in the kitchen. So that's a really exciting project that I'm just getting started on. And then after that one, I will be ghostwriting for a boy band star that shall remain nameless for the moment. But he was the only one that went to go train in the Russian space program. So if you know your boy band history, you can figure that one out.
Okay, next up is another child of Mississippi. He has the distinct honor, and he will never tell you this because he's much too humble a person, but he's a winner of the Southern Foodway Alliance's Guardian of Local Food Tradition. And he's also a master baker. And well, this is what's notable. He was hired to be baker at the esteemed Bottle Tree Bakery in Mississippi, and he wound up marrying the owner-proprietor, and that would be the lovely woman sitting to his right. So that's the connection there. And it was most recently with the Mockingbird Bakery. And what he's going to do, well, here's the other notable thing. He's the inventor of a wonderful dish that's, as I understand, was sort of designed to be eaten at tailgate parties so that you could have one hand free for drinking. And the Southern Sundae, and which is just biscuits with stuff, a lot of good stuff piled on top of it. But he's also going to serve us something today. So Donald Bender, take it over and tell us what we're going to soon be eating here.
Well, first, thanks for having me here. This is really great. I made the little biscuit came out a little flat today, so it's more like a venison savory cookie, if y'all tried it out here. But I shot that deer in January, and we brought on the plane and and took it here. So I wanted to, have it for the, for the party today and stuff. But I'm an in limbo baker right now. My bakery was just closed down in February with the sale of Viking. So, being out here in Orlando is a nice place to check some bakeries out and things and looking around. But just making breads and.
Where are these biscuits?
Oh, they've been passed around.
Well, why don't I have one?
Yeah.
Y'all already got them?
They're like a little crumpet, actually.
Okay, what do you think? How are they? Good stuff?
All right. Yeah.
Well, Donald was saying that he did have some, see, that's what chefs do. They have to be wonderfully inventive, and I think you got here yesterday and found out that your biscuit dough was just not performing like biscuit dough should.
Yeah, but the kitchen was busy yesterday too, and I was just trying to find my little spot. But the taste is all there. They just should have been a little bit bigger, a little taller.
Well, I'll get one sooner or later here. Yeah. I'm going to turn this over to y'all because I've let them talk here, and I would love it if y'all could, and I think we've spoken to everyone here, if y'all could throw some questions at our panel here today and see what comes back at you. So please gladly raise your hands and offer something up. Yes?
Is there any one chef or restaurant that inspires you?
Is there any, okay, I'll repeat that. Is there any, the question was, is there any one chef or restaurant or perhaps even cookbook that inspires you in what you do or what you've done? James, you can start her off here.
I wouldn't say it kind of started me off, but when I was already through the process and in culinary school, Tom Colicchio, who was the chef at Gramercy Tavern, came and spoke at the school, and I really started following his work and staging on the weekends from school there, and just what he was doing with food at the time, and really the kind of the art of cooking was just kind of coming into, I think, American kind of standards. He really kind of brought or kind of shape my style, I guess, and I said, this is how I want to do it. I want to be very hands-on, very artisan, make everything from scratch. He kind of inspired me with the market cooking and all that. So I'd say Colicchio and Gramercy Tavern for me kind of helped me kind of form my philosophy.
Martha?
When I've always loved cookbooks, and I worked at a wonderful bookstore in Oxford, Mississippi called Square Books, and they had a little cafe upstairs, and my job was to make something out of whatever new cookbook they had, and I really fell in love with cookbooks. And I moved out to Los Angeles, and the first building I walked into, other than the apartment where I was going to live, was the La Brea Bakery. And I walked in and saw that bread there, and it, like the skies opened, the angels sung down on me that this is what I should do. And Nancy Silverton, first of all, back in the day, you know, there just weren't that many women chefs, and particularly women that were running their own kitchens. And so to see Nancy and just how her crazy work ethic was of, you know, mixing dough and then falling asleep on the bag of flour for like 45 minutes and then getting up and really knowing what you were getting yourself into. Nancy was a big influence on me. And Sumi Chang, who's a pastry chef in Pasadena, one day told me that, she called me Queen. She's like, you know, Queen, you know what people want to eat. And I was like, I do know what people want to eat. And at that age, I didn't think I knew much about anything. And that really put me on the right path. And also working for Susan Spicer at Bayona in New Orleans, again, working in a kitchen that was manned by women, really opened my eyes up about the possibilities for all of that.
I guess I've been most inspired by my customers. Just talking to the people and finding out what kind of breads they like, and that kind of goes from there and how it works. I love Peter Reinhardt's cookbook, and I blend a few different, like Nancy Silverton and Peter Reinhardt's kind of theory of baking, and try to make my own. So that's kind of my inspirations.
I'm not going to talk. I'm eating one of the biscuits right now. So, Troy?
Well, since I'm not a chef, I really honestly was motivated in my business by the old men in the mountains who taught me about the hearts of whiskey. And it turns out that those guys were smarter than you can imagine. And they knew that over the course of a distillation run from the beginning to the end, which on our still, which is 1,300 gallons, takes about 10 or 12 hours. At the beginning, you're going to produce what we call heads, and the heads are full of toxic elements. They have acetones, methanols, aldehydes, formaldehydes, et cetera in it. They knew and learned that if they gathered up all the heads and waited until the nose on the distillate was really beautiful smelling, that was the point that they should start collecting 12-quart jars on a 50-gallon still. So once they collected those 12-quart jars, they collected all the rest of their spirit in one big tub. Then they would take the heads at the beginning, the tails at the end, mix it together, sell it down the road to the fools, and they would keep the 12-quart jars for themselves. That was the keeping whiskey. And when those guys inspired me, I said, you know what? If I can make the keeping whiskey, if we can cut our spirits that well, we're going to have a superfine quality product. And so that's what motivated me. And so I sit here with you today.
Joe, what was your inspiration?
Well, mine was kind of roundabout. I was supposed to be an archaeologist. I got a degree in archaeology from Auburn, and I was working on a fort from the War of 1812. Was digging up a fort, which is incredibly boring work. If anyone's ever dug up a fort, you'll know what I'm talking about. But I really got in. What was cool was I was hanging out with all the locals, the folks that were around that area, and I started talking to them, and I actually started recording a lot of their stories because they were just telling the best stories. And that's what I wanted to do, and I kind of ended up at Ole Miss to do a master's degree in Southern Studies, which, yes, you can get a master's degree in Southern Studies. That exists. And while I was there, ran into John T. Edge and Andy Harper, who are both still my bosses, and they had some money to make a film, and I had shown some interest in that, but had never shot a frame of film in my life, and they said they took a chance on me, bought me a camera, sent me to Berea, Kentucky to interview Bill Best, all of which is to say Bill Best is my inspiration, because he's a bean and tomato farmer in Berea, Kentucky. He's been growing the same beans and tomatoes that have been in his family for hundreds of years. They've been passed down in Appalachia from family to family to family, and he's basically like a Johnny Appleseed of Appalachia. He not only grows his family seeds, but he is a repository now for seeds from all over. And so he has like the genetic history of the bean in Appalachia in a chest freezer in his garage, you know, which is true. But my point is that I went up there and shot a bunch of footage with him, and it was the most god-awful footage in the history of footage. I mean, it was terrible. It was the worst. I got back and looked at it, and I was like, this sucks. And I called him and I said, Bill, I really want to make a good story about you, and I really want to do this right, and I didn't do it right. Can I come back and do it again? And he said, yes, yes you can. He was so nice and so agreeable and such a kind man to let me do it again. And that inspired me to keep going. And then also his story about how the food and the history and the culture intersect. I mean, it couldn't have been a more perfect situation for me as I wouldn't even say a young filmmaker, you know, just a idiot kid running around with a camera and an old Saturn that was leaking fluid out of the radiator, you know. I mean, that was what I was, but he really inspired me to see that there was a lot more to food than I ever thought you could get from it, and to keep going. So he's my inspiration for sure.
I'm inspired by this whole cadre of young chefs and food writers and food professionals that have revisited this whole farm-to-table, whole carcass utilization. You know, my mother's generation could cook, a child of the Depression, everything on the cow, the hog, from the tongue to the tail. Cooks of my generation, you know, were really good with steaks and roasts and ground beef and those kinds of things. And my daughter's generation could cook a hamburger and a filet, sort of. And you know, we now just have these talented, passionate people that are revisiting the old ways and showing respect to the animal by utilizing all the parts. And I'm deeply appreciative for that.
Other questions? I think we have a mic out there too that is somewhere. Other questions? Jason? Oh, you're loud. You can probably stand up and yell it.
Joe, first of all, I want to tell you, I don't know if you ever heard this, but you kind of resemble a sane version of Will Muschamp.
I'll take that.
I mean,
you know, he coached at all. I went to Auburn before. He coached there, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Good.
That guy's insane.
Yes, totally. That's a compliment for sure, though.
Yeah. He was just recently alleged to have paid some players at Auburn, I read this week, so,
Never.
you know. Can you believe that? Yeah. Auburn in a football scandal? What are the odds?
Right. My question is, you know, we were here for the film yesterday, so we see these just rich stories of these people you encounter. How do you deal with somebody who maybe refuses to be on camera, but they have a story that needs to be told?
It's only ever happened one time, I swear to God, out of like 30 some odd, and well, I probably interviewed on camera over 100 people, and only once did it ever happen that that somebody didn't want to be interviewed. And this was actually a guy that was winning an award that we gave to him, and he's very much deserving and runs a oyster company up in Apalachicola, and his family's been doing it for years and years and years. He just didn't want to go on camera. And I would show, and you know, he had agreed to do it, and I went to Apalachicola, and I'd go down there every morning, and I'd say, "You ready to do the interview?" He'd say, "No, I don't think I'm going to do it today. I think we better wait. I think we better wait till tomorrow." And I was like, "All right, that's fine." You know, I'm like, "Okay, I'm here in Apalachicola on work. I guess I'll find something to do. You know, I'll figure it out." But I would just go down and get on these boats with these oystermen, you know. I would just go down. There was one guy they called the Old Goat. He was great. I'd just go down there and say, "Hey, Goat, can I ride around on your boat today? You know, go out oystering with you?" And he was like, "I don't care." And so I'd rode with him. And then the next day, I spent all day in the oyster house with the ladies who were doing all the shucking and doing all that. And before I knew it, I'd made a film about, you know, that wasn't about the guy I came down there to make a film about. So to me, you know, that's kind of how you deal with it. You know, you just... I've never once put a camera in somebody's face that hadn't already agreed to doing it. You know, I'm not going to be the guy that knocks on your door and you open it up and here's the camera and I'm like, yeah, show me your biscuits, or, you know, like whatever. You know what I mean? That's just not going to happen. We're about celebrating people, and we're about, you know, really telling those stories. So you don't see a lot of exposés and stuff in the Southern Foodways Alliance. I think it's great that movies like Food Inc. are out there that are really raising the awareness and the consciousness. That's not our narrative. Our narrative is one of celebration, is one of saying, look at the folks that are out here doing the good stuff, the right stuff. And yes, we need to have people, watchdogs, are saying, hey, look at this is what not good. But to answer your question, 9 times out of 10, or actually 10 times out of, or 9.9999 times out of 10, people are really, really up for having their story told. You know, people like Will, who I don't know, Will and I've never talked about what he must have thought when I showed up at his farm the first time to do the filming, but after 10, 15 minutes, we were just hanging out and having a good time and talking about his family, and that's what food does, is you start talking about beef, and before you know it, we're talking about the 5 generations of his family that have been there. We're talking about his kind of road to Damascus moment where he, you know, shifted from the old industrialized methods to the grass-fed organic methods he's doing now. So, yeah, that very rarely happens because food really does. People really open up about it, and it's as cheesy as it is to say, and I'm sure every documentary maker has said this at some point. Everybody really does have a story to tell, and I think most people want to tell it, and I think a lot of times we don't, as a culture, listen very much. You know, there's that line where it's like people aren't so much listening as waiting for their turn to talk, and I think that happens a lot, and I think people like to be listened to. They like somebody to listen to their story, and I'm very fortunate that that's my job, is to listen. So it's a good question. Thank you.
I have 2 whiskey questions. One is for Troy. Where can we buy your products locally, if possible? The second question is for Joe. So much of your interest has to do with the traditions and how generations relate through food or whiskey or whatever. And I'm wondering if you'd tell the story that Wright Thompson wrote about discovering your granddaddy's whiskey.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Thankfully, you can find our products here in Orlando and scattered around Florida. We're in the ABC stores and Total Wine. Some of the better restaurants have us on their menus now. Last night we were at Cask and Larder, and we've been at Ravenous Pig in the past. We're at the Grand Bohemian. Table, the restaurant that's kind of just a one big dining table place. Wilderness Lodge brought us in at Disney. We're the first white whiskey that was brought onto Disney property, and it's become the best-selling cocktail on their menu. So we are around, and I appreciate your supporting the brand, really do.
What the gentleman was mentioning was a story that Wright Thompson, he's a writer for ESPN. He lives in Oxford, and he's one of my best friends in the world. And you're right, it absolutely is a story about how food connects us one to another. When my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, died, she lived in the house with us growing up. And when she died, we had to go through, my parents had moved to Dothan, my mom had taken a job in South Alabama, and we had to sell the house. And so we went through and we were getting everything out of the closets, like all of her Christmas sweaters, which was like a lot of Christmas sweaters. And way in the back, we found an old bottle of Jim Beam. And it was I'm named after my grandfather, Herschel Joseph York. Thankfully, they dropped the Herschel and just gave me Joseph. But I'm named after him, and I never met him. He died right before I was born, and that's why they named me for him. Never met him, but that was his bottle of whiskey. He had hidden it back there. He was a Baptist deacon, and he hid it back there, and it had been there since, 1977, when he probably thought, he was going to go back and get a nip when my grandmother wasn't looking, and instead he had a stroke and he died, and it stayed there forever, and she never found it, and we found it. And so I got it, and I kept it, and it was really important to me to have this memory of him, because again, I carry his name, but I never knew him. All I have are photographs and stories that my dad tells me. And so every year, you know, around my birthday or his or whenever the mood struck me, I would get that little bottle down and take just a little sip kind of in remembrance of my granddad. And then one night, me and Wright and a bunch of other guys were sitting around. This good buddy of mine from Spain was there too. And we were all telling stories about our family, and we were eating, and everybody had brought a little. It was kind of like a little potluck that kind of happened, and we got to telling stories about our parents and our grandparents and all the rest of that. And it was, you know, kind of one of those whiskey-fueled evenings that turns, you know, whiskey it can turn you out or it can turn you in. And this night we were very introspective in our cups, and I went and got that bottle, and we passed it around, and we all told stories about our grandfathers and about growing up and about what this place and these people meant to us. And we actually ended up finishing it. I gave the last sip to my friend from Spain, and he looked and he said, "This is the best present a man can give another man, the last sip of his granddad's whiskey to a man from another country." And I was like, I don't know what that means, but you... No, I knew exactly what it meant. You know, that was the thing. I knew exactly what it meant. And so, you know, that was... And Wright, you know, he didn't tell me he was doing this, but he wrote it up as a story for Grantland.com, and he sent it to me the day before it came out, and I read it, and I cried like a baby and loved it, and my dad read it and had the same reaction. But yeah, I mean, it really is, it goes straight to the heart of what we're talking about with our films. You know, hopefully that's what we get at, is that emotion and that connection to place and to each other that we get from those little tastes. And Wright actually did buy me another bottle of Jim Beam not long after that, and I have it in my closet actually in the back, and with strict instructions to leave it there for our grandchildren whenever they come along. So, thank you for that question.
Yes, you already have the mic in the back.
I have a mic. Yes. I just wanted to talk. I'm a professor at UCF, and I never get to see my children's faces anymore. When I walk around campus, as I'm sure you know, because they're all looking down into their iPhone. So that's one thing I'm just missing. It kind of goes along with books. We used to have a wonderful Borders bookstore here where people could meet, talk. And I'm worried about disappearance of bookstores, even the disappearance of real books, you know, because there's Kindles and things of that sort. So maybe I'm just being old-fashioned because I'm old, but the disappearance of bookstores still, I think, is important. And it could have, you know, food. It had whole sections on food in bookstores that you could go and look over books. So I just wonder what people feel about that. Just kind of a comment on what's happening. And maybe it'll change back. We have fads and people go this way and that way, so maybe that's what will happen. But I do miss bookstores.
So your question is about, you know, kind of maybe what, with modern publishing and the demise of cookbooks, what the impact is on all of us? I want to make sure we understand that question there. Right. Or Martha, if you understand it, just jump in.
I have really mixed feelings about the whole e-book versus a physical book. I'm happy to say that there are wonderful independent bookstores across the country that are still thriving. We're lucky in Mississippi that we have several great ones, and Square Books, where I worked, and Joe worked there also, was just named the Bookstore of the Year in Publishers Weekly. But we also have Lemuria and Reed's Books in Tupelo, and there are a lot of independent bookstores in Mississippi. But when my books come out, you go off on book tour, and I've been really blown away by how supportive the independent bookstores have been. And when my first book came out in 2008, it came out only as a physical book. And then in 2011, my second book came out, and it came out as an ebook. At the same time, it came out as a physical book, and then they reissued my first book as an ebook. And it's a difficult thing because as a writer, you survive on your royalties, and once it becomes an ebook, it basically becomes a free book for whoever wants it and however it gets shared. The bookstores that I've visited all over the country, for the most part, their customers are so loyal, and there's a spot for both versions of things. And I am happy to say that there are, independent booksellers that are getting up every day and involving themselves in the community. And as long as there's that sort of interaction, I don't think they're all going to dry up and blow away. But it's up to communities to be supportive of those bookstores. So, if you're not going at least to the bookstore, at least go to IndieBound and help the little guy hang in there.
I should point out that when you exit here today, there are books out there for sale. And I know that the authors that are sitting here would be delighted to sign those for you. Any other thoughts on cookbooks in the future or the way things exist now, Joe?
I'm just going to throw a plug out there. If you guys really, if it just hurts your heart to buy from Amazon or Barnes & Noble and you just feel that something is slowly being stripped away from you in that process, squarebooks.com. That's where you go. That's our local bookstore in Oxford, Mississippi. It was voted the Publishers Weekly best independent bookstore in America last week. It's fantastic. And these guys, you can call them from my mom, I think, has spent, I don't think I have an inheritance anymore. I think she spent it all on, not that I would have had one anyway. But she calls up there, they know her, they know everybody. They just talk to you and they know what they don't have, how Amazon keeps track of you and you go back there and it's like, last time you were looking at this, so perhaps you'd be interested in buying a basketball goal or a smoker. And you're like, I don't want those things. They keep up with you and they really know you and get to know you and give you great, so just buy your books from them. That's all I'm saying. That's a shameless pitch for my good friends, but squarebooks.com, that's where you should buy your books. And then we'll have one good one left and we can all hang out there.
Anyone else? Right here, the microphone is coming your way.
I don't need a microphone.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I was just curious to the farmer as to if he had a specific breed of cows he raised.
Our program is not breed specific. Our herd of cattle goes all the way back to my great-grandfather. It's a closed herd on the maternal side. In other words, the female cows on my farm were born there, their mother, grandmother, great-grandmother for 140-something years. It's an Angus-based herd today because my father and I have been guilty of the Flavor of the Month Club with bulls. So right now we've got 34 Angus bulls. So.
Okay, one more question.
Actually, this question is also for Will. I hear you talking about, how tough it is to switch over. I'm a farm kid from the Midwest myself, and so I just was wondering if you'd talk a little bit about the challenges of changing the mindset of going from the industrial farming model, because I know how hard it is for those guys, that have been doing family farms that can even keep them, but that because of the importance of, I believe, trying to be more local and all the things that you're talking about, to forget the political side, just the fundamentals of our society. And if you could just talk about the challenges of that switchover.
The industrial farming model has not served farmers or rural communities very well. There are a lot fewer of us. We're a lot bigger. But there's no evil force at work here. It's the American consumer's demand for cheaper, more and more consistent food. I was talking to these guys earlier. When I first started transitioning my farm over, I was a very industrial, commercial, commodity farmer. When I first started the transition, at some level, I believe that I was an early innovator in changing how the country produces its food. I no longer believe that. I now believe it's pretty much a nation of Walmart shoppers. And I serve a niche market. It's a growing niche, but it's a niche. And I'm okay with that. I'm not an evangelist. I'm not trying to get other people to change how they farm. But I feel truly blessed that there are people out there that are willing to pay a little more for their product that allows me to farm the way I want to farm. But the transition is difficult.
Hey, thank you all for coming out here today. These folks are going to be hanging around afterwards for a little bit. Thanks for your good questions, your attention, and thank you all.